What's a terrifying, unexplainable thing you've experienced that still give you the chills to this day? When I was little, around 11 years old, I was staying at my aunt's house with my cousins, playing games, and enjoying summer vacation. That night, it was hot and humid inside, and I couldn't sleep well, so I kept tossing and turning in bed. I wanted to open the window on the side wall to let in cooler air from outside, but for some reason, my mind told me not to. Instead of tossing around, I became fixated on staring at that window, as if I were waiting for something to happen. Within a few minutes of watching, I saw what looked like a head with long hair glide past the entire window from right to left. I was on the second floor, so it terrified me. I turned the other way and tried to fall asleep. The next morning, still confused about what I had seen, I thought maybe it came from the house next door. I walked to the window and finally opened it all the way. To my surprise, the next house was about 20 feet down the street, and the side facing us had no windows, only a solid cement wall. To this day, I still wonder what I would have seen if the window had been open, and that thing had glided inside instead. Story 2. My childhood home was very haunted, but fortunately, I never experienced anything myself. These are my family's stories. When we first moved to the States, we bought a small mobile home in 2001. I was a baby at the time, but even years later, all the way until 2023, we still saw things. The person who saw the most in that home was my brother. He claimed that at night he would see a tall, slender man with a top hat who would go through his belongings, opening his drawers, looking in his closet, while my brother pretended to be asleep. One night, he had sleep paralysis and saw the same figure walking around his room. Since we had bunk beds, the figure floated toward his feet on the top bunk and grabbed them hard. He had a chihuahua named Elsa sleeping under the covers by his feet, and she started growling and barking, which scared the figure away and woke my brother up. My brother saw that figure so many times growing up that he eventually needed therapy for it, saying it would get into his mind and give him terrible thoughts about self-harm. Another story from my mom. We used to wash our clothes outside because the washer and dryer were in a shed. My mom would sometimes do laundry at night, and the shed was in the backyard behind the trailer. We had a light back there, but it was dim. One night, my mom was putting clothes into the dryer when she heard footsteps in the dirt walking toward her, like someone dragging their pants. She assumed it was my dad because he walked barefoot a lot. Then something whispered, "Hey," right in her ear. She spun around, but nothing was there. She freaked out and ran inside, and she never did laundry at night again. What makes it even stranger is that we had a neighbor who liked to drink beer and listen to music on his porch late at night. He asked my mom, "Hey, why are you guys doing laundry so late?" My mom said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Yeah, last night around 3 a.m, when I was out here drinking, I kept seeing someone walking back and forth into your shed and out into your backyard." Which is crazy because we definitely were not doing laundry at 3 a.m. There are so many other stories, but I'm starting to spook myself writing this in the dark. Story 3. My sister and I shared a room with 2 twin beds when we were kids. For many years, I would hear people murmuring or a television playing in the living room late into the night, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. I always assumed it was our parents. One night, right before I moved away, I finally got up to see who on earth was awake so late. I walked into the living room of our very small house, maybe 1,000 square feet, but it was completely dark. The television wasn't on and no one was there. I walked back down the hallway and slowly opened my parents' bedroom door. They were sound asleep and their television was off. When I returned to my room, the murmuring was gone. I decided it must have been my brain playing tricks on me. Years and years later, when my sister and I were both in our 40s, we got to talking about ghosts. She mentioned that she used to hear murmuring in our bedroom when we were kids too, but she could never figure out what it was. Apparently, she would get up and check as well. A couple of years ago, I stayed at my parents' house again, in that same room. There were no murmuring sounds anymore. Story 4. When I was a teenager, I had some strange dreams. In one of them, I was in a large room filled with people in costumes, like a masquerade ball. There were astronauts, Marie Antoinette, and others. But no one would speak to me. The walls were paneled halfway up and painted white to the ceiling. I felt drawn to a staircase in the back corner and went up to the first landing. When I turned, someone was above me, and a large piece of furniture came crashing down toward me. That is where the dream ended. About a year later, after graduation, my date took me to dinner. The area had several different venues, and one of them was a wax museum. It sounded fun, so we went in with our friends. As soon as I entered, I saw the walls, paneled halfway up and painted white to the ceiling. There were the astronaut, Marie Antoinette, and the other figures from my dream. I remember feeling pulled in. The staircase was in the back, and I went toward it. I apparently went up a few steps, but I do not remember anything after that until I found myself outside, sweating and upset. My date and friends caught up to me and said I had run like a terrified rabbit, pushing past people to get out. Ask me if I have been to a wax museum since. Story 5. Little disclaimer. I have no idea if this is paranormal, and maybe I just haven't spent enough time in the woods to know a perfectly reasonable explanation for what happened. But this has haunted me for years. Just before COVID, my best friend and I discovered that we both had the same 3 days off from work right before her birthday. She hadn't made any plans, and at the very last minute, we put together a quick 2-night camping trip in the San Bernardino Mountains since it was close to us. Her roommate was able to join, but had to leave extra early on our last day because she had work later that morning, so we drove separately. My friend and her roommate had both recently adopted puppies, and we were really excited to bring them on a camping trip and take them swimming. When my friend and I camp, we usually stick to national parks. They're easy, aside from getting the campsite reservations. Well developed enough for people like us who enjoy the outdoors, but aren't super experienced or specialized. And there's typically a lot of information online on what to expect. Ultimately, it's just what we're familiar with. We were a little nervous about trying to grab a last-minute spot at this national forest, since we had no idea what to expect and could not find much information online about the campground we picked. And it was the middle of summer. To our surprise, the campground was practically empty. We did a quick loop around and saw only 2 occupied spots, well on the other side of the ground. Awesome. The area was also stunning, with an incredible 3-mile loop trail connected to the campground. It felt like we had hit the jackpot. We arrived, set up camp, and went for the 3-mile hike. It was incredible, a little hidden gem we had never heard about. Later, we settled in, had a few drinks, and called it a night. The next day, we found a small river with these great waist-deep pools of calm, flowing water, where we took the puppies and taught them to swim. We ate at a little town deli that was delicious, then drove back to our campsite. Once again, we lit the campfire and had a couple of drinks. The roommate, who had to leave early the next morning, called it a night around 8 o'clock, taking the exhausted puppies with her into her tent. They were all knocked out. My friend and I stayed up until about midnight, then decided to pack what we could so we would have less to worry about in the morning. We finally crawled into our sleeping bags around 1 a.m. I had the roommate to my right, my friend to my left, and the puppies all around us. I tend to struggle with sleep, so I am always the one awake the latest. But honestly, it had been such an awesome couple of days, and I was so excited about everything that I was just lying there with my hands behind my head, staring up at the stars. When my friend and I go camping, we usually leave off the rainfly so we can see the night sky. I kept thinking about how much I loved this sight and how I could not wait to come back. I had even been wanting to try camping solo, which is very intimidating for me as a woman. And I thought this would be the perfect place to finally do it. I was genuinely stoked. I had been lying there thinking about all of this for about half an hour when I suddenly noticed something. Something large and round was slowly and silently pressing in on the tent, high up, right above my head, almost at the seam where the tent's nylon and mesh screen met. It pushed in far, slid down slowly about a foot, and then lifted away just as slowly. I noticed it, and for a split second, I did not think anything of it. Then the realization hit me, and I froze. I waited for something, to look down into the tent from above. I fully expected to make eye contact. I held my breath and just listened. I could not hear a single thing. Not a leaf crunching, not dirt or gravel shifting, not breathing or sniffing, no wind, nothing. It was a full moon, and there was plenty of light. No moving shadows. Completely, terrifyingly silent. Everything ran through my head. A bear? I should have heard it sniffing around at the very least, right? A mountain lion? My tent is 6 feet tall. Whatever pushed in that high would have had to be standing on its hind legs, which is possible, and they are notoriously silent. A person. Truly my worst fear in that moment. 3 women in their early 20s alone in a tent in the middle of the night. Maybe they were just looking for the restroom, but we were so far from one. And I could not hear anything. I would have heard someone walking. I know I would. At the very least, I would have seen a shadow. A small squirrel falling from a tree. We were not under any trees. And whatever this was, moved too slowly and too deliberately. Some random foliage brushing the tent. We were nowhere near a bush. I really tried to rack my brain. More than half an hour passed, and I was nowhere near sleep. But I had somewhat rationalized the whole thing as a strange one, off with a perfectly reasonable explanation outside of my lived experience. But the adrenaline was still surging. Then it happened again. This time, it was directly in front of me. And instead of moving from top to bottom, it moved from left to right. Large, roundish, at least 5 inches pushed into the tent, moving. So, damn, slowly. I started kicking at the dogs. Wake up, bark, do something. But they were just puppies, 6 months old, completely exhausted from their big, exciting day, swimming in the creek. This thing returned within minutes, but now it was on my left, and this time it moved much faster, sliding from left to right. Still no sound, nothing. I started shaking my friend hard and said loudly, "Get up, there's someone outside our tent. You need to get up." She mumbled something like, "There's nothing out there," without even opening her eyes. I told her, "No, seriously, this is the 3rd time it's touched our tent in an hour." She rolled over and told me to go to sleep. I didn't. I always sleep with my hatchet just in case, though I really wished I owned a gun right then. I unsheathed it and laid it on my chest. I did not sleep at all that night. Not until the sun came up. I managed to get a couple of hours after daylight before my friend woke me so we could start packing. I did not say anything until we were well on our way home. And she did not bring it up either. Maybe she did not remember me trying to wake her. I finally mentioned it, and she said, "Oh, weird. That happened the first night too. It woke me up at about 3 a.m. What the actual hell? Why didn't you tell me that yesterday? I didn't want to freak you out." Holy crap. After that, I spent literal weeks online trying to find videos of animals pressing against tents. Listening, watching. searching for anything even remotely similar. I found nothing. I combed through forums for hunters and outdoorsmen and could not find a single description that matched what I had experienced. I asked people I knew who spend a lot of time outdoors if they had ever heard of anything like it. They had not. I really loved that campsite and wish it had not been ruined for me. But I will never go back there. Lamau. Story 6. When I was a teenager, I was babysitting, and the child, maybe about 18 months to 2 years old, was down for a nap. It was around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, so broad daylight. I was downstairs when I heard her babbling and giggling, so I assumed she was awake and went upstairs to get her. When I reached the landing and looked into the room, she was standing in her crib with her back to me, laughing at a woman dressed in black. The woman's clothes looked old-fashioned, maybe Victorian or Gibson Girl era, but she was solid, not transparent or wispy. And I froze because I had absolutely no idea someone else was in the house. I yelled, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" She looked up at me and vanished, just gone. The little girl turned to me, confused, like she did not understand where her friend went. I grabbed her from the crib, ran downstairs, and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to hold it together until her parents came home. I was too scared to say anything, afraid they would think I was hallucinating or losing it, which I wondered about as well, but this kid saw it. She was interacting with it and looked at me when the woman disappeared. I had nightmares for weeks, and it was about 5 or 6 years before I told anyone what happened. I made a point of always being busy when they called to ask if I could babysit. I still have no idea what I saw. It actually made me lean toward multiverse theory a little, like maybe someone somehow slipped through timelines, because the figure being solid and appearing in broad daylight did not feel like a ghost. But I also cannot explain how this woman was talking to and interacting with a child, and then just vanished into thin air. Story 7. I had a regular client whose daughter lived in another town, so I had never met her or even seen a photo. But my client talked about her sometimes, how she missed her, things like that. One night, the evening before the client was due to come in, I dreamed about the daughter and that she was pregnant. The next day, my client came in and I told her about the dream and how strange it felt to dream about someone I had never met. We laughed and she said she would love to become a grandmother. A couple of weeks later, she texted me saying that her daughter was pregnant, unexpectedly. Years later, after we had moved away, I had another dream. This time, it was about my old neighbor's daughter, whom I had known since she was a toddler. In the dream, we were sitting cross-legged on the beach, and she said, "Just wanted to tell you I am pregnant." The next day, I contacted her mother on Facebook and asked if her daughter was expecting. She replied, "How do you know?" She told only me and nobody else. So far, no more pregnancy dreams. Just one more dream story, and it was a weird one. Years ago, I picked up a book by Sylvia Browne, The Psychic, at a charity shop. I took it home and started reading it that night in bed. I had never heard of her before, but I found the first couple of chapters pretty interesting. That night, I dreamed that Sylvia was sitting in a massive 4-poster bed, wearing a golden pleated dress. She patted the bed beside her and invited me to sit down, like she wanted to chat. The same day, after work, I Googled her and was greeted by headlines. "Sylvia Browne has died." I thought, huh? What? It turned out she had died the day before, which, because of the time difference, was the same night I had that dream. Just a coincidence? Who knows? None of my beloved relatives have ever reached out to me in their final hours. So why would Sylvia choose a total random person on the other side of the Atlantic? Still, kind of strange. Story 8. It was late 2012 or early 2013, and my sister and I were having a sleepover in my room on my loft bed. After we turned off the light and started drifting off, we heard scratching sounds beneath us on the floor. We assumed it was our dog. She must have somehow snuck into the room, so we were shushing her and trying to comfort her. But the scratching kept getting louder and more violent. I think the bed even started shaking a little, and I remember thinking, is she kicking it? Geez, she's really freaking out. We need to calm her down and let her out. So, my sister climbed down, but was still standing on the steps of the loft bed. She flipped on the light, and everything stopped, dead silent, immediately. But she just stared at the floor, completely silent. I said, What is it? Is she okay? And my sister said, There's nothing there. I was like, what? I didn't believe her. So I leaned over the edge of the loft bed, and sure enough, nothing. Absolutely nothing. We could not have bolted out of that room any faster. To be fair, we did try again later, but the bed kept creaking and shaking, and we freaked ourselves out and left again. We actually ended up taking my hamster out of the room permanently and just shutting the door for good. I never slept in that bed or that room again, and every time I went in there after that, I would get freaked out and have this horrible, unsettling feeling I couldn't explain. I still dream about that room once in a while. In the dreams, I always have to open the door, and the room is dark, full of spiders, and it freaks me out all over again. Second place would be the time we were sleeping downstairs in a different house. I woke up in the very early morning, around 1 a.m, because my sister and my mom were freaking out. They explained what had happened. Apparently, at the exact same time, they both woke up with a start after hearing me yelling for them. My mom heard me calling from my bedroom across the hall, and my sister heard me calling from upstairs. My sister jumped up to go help me, but for some reason, my mom glanced at the spot where I was supposed to be sleeping. And when she saw me actually there, she immediately grabbed my sister and told her to stay put. While they were trying to make sense of what was happening, I woke up because of their panicking, and as soon as I did, my voice stopped immediately. We still cannot explain it, and it still freaks us out to this day. Third place is when we were moving out of that particular house. We were all sleeping upstairs this time, and I was dreaming that I was downstairs. In the dream, I was looking around, and the whole room had this strange white aura, like everything was glowing faintly. I remember feeling confused and not understanding why I was even there. A bee flew past me, and I followed it with my eyes. As it drifted toward the bathroom, I suddenly heard my mom calling my name. She kept calling me, and her voice sounded irritated, like she knew I was awake and just ignoring her. But in the dream, I had this horrible, heavy feeling. Just remembering it now gives me chills, and that tight, sinking feeling in my stomach. I had this overwhelming gut instinct not to answer and not even to move. She grew angrier, and it seemed as though she was about to confront me when I woke up because my sister was screaming at the top of her lungs. We managed to calm her down, but she kept insisting that someone was downstairs because she had woken up to the sound of someone talking down there. We checked, but nothing was there. There was also the time we heard my sister's radio playing in her room upstairs, even though she had never plugged it in, and it started from literally nowhere. That house always smelled like coffee, completely out of nowhere, even though none of us drank coffee. I'm starting to freak myself out again, so I'll stop here. LOL. If anyone has any theories or explanations, I'd love to hear them, LOL. Story 9. Years ago, in a small old house in southwest Vermont, it was a snowy morning. I was cozy under the comforters while my then boyfriend went into town to get something, and I decided to stay behind. I lay there enjoying the sound of wind and snow against the windows. It was peaceful. Then I started to hear a rustling over the comforter near my feet, like something crawling across it. I thought it might be a mouse, so I sat up and looked. Nothing. I lay back down, and the sound returned, this time moving over my feet and legs. I sat up again, still nothing. When I lay back down a third time, the sensation came back instantly. But this time it moved all over me, my feet, legs, hips, back, and shoulders. It felt like hands gliding gently across the thick comforter. I wasn't scared, I was curious. So I stayed still and observed. And then the rustling began to sound like a man's voice whispering. I kept trying to listen and figure out what he was saying. At that point, I honestly thought I was going crazy. So I got up, made the bed, and went to make coffee. I completely forgot about it. That following summer, my then boyfriend, his sister, and I were driving back to that house. And they started sharing stories about the creepy things that had happened there. Electrical devices beeping all at once, a man standing in the doorway wearing a top hat, the cat suddenly losing its mind, lights turning off, windows closing on their own. So whatever I experienced was that top hat wearing man ghost trying to feel me up. I don't blame him. My ex and I had done some savory things the night before. Story 10. When I was a kid, between 4 and 6 years old, I used to play in a room in my house. Today, it's my bedroom. But back then, I always slept with my grandma because I was too afraid to sleep alone. I have more stories about why, all involving supernatural things. But all my toys were kept in that room, so I always went there to play. One afternoon, right around noon, I went into the room and sat on the bed playing with something. Behind me on the bed was a teddy bear, and in front of me there was a mirror. Looking back now, I realized that was a huge mistake. So I was playing, and in my peripheral vision, I started to see something in the mirror. I looked up because I thought it was my grandma coming to ask me something, and I saw the teddy bear lifting its leg. When I stopped and stared at it, frozen with fear, the leg dropped, and I felt it fall because the plush toy's legs had been resting against my back. I immediately threw the plush toy out the window and ran to the living room. For about a week, I was too scared to even walk near that room again. Story 11. In 2020, we moved back to our original country after living abroad for years. My parents had built a big house 20 years ago that we only used during summer vacations. Every summer, the whole family would gather there. But this time was different. The house is isolated, with a massive field behind it, and only one neighbor in front, who lives in France and visits only during the summer. The town itself is mostly empty year-round because most of the people live overseas. My mom, my sister, who was 27 at the time, and I arrived early. My dad stayed behind because of work and was supposed to join us later. So it was just the three of us alone in a massive house in the middle of nowhere. At first, everything seemed fine. We cleaned, cooked, organized the rooms, and tried to enjoy the quiet. But then things started happening. Every single night, we heard footsteps on the rooftop. Every night. We checked for cats or any animals, but there was nothing. We tried not to think too much of it. Our rooms were close together, so any loud noise was easy to hear. We started hearing banging coming from the closets. At first, we thought it was just wood bugs or old furniture creaking, but it always happened around 1:30 in the morning, every night. Then one night, my sister screamed in her sleep. My mom and I rushed into her room. She was standing in the hallway, and you could tell she was terrified. She said something had been pulling her blanket off. At first, she thought it had just slipped, but when she tried to pull it back, she couldn't. It felt like someone was holding it tightly and refusing to let go. After that, she never slept alone again. She started sleeping with my mom, with the lights on and the door wide open. But two things happened after that I will never forget. The first thing was the baby crying from the field. We would hear it around 3 or 4 in the morning, crying for hours. We thought maybe someone had abandoned a baby, so we ran to the rooftop to look. The sound was loud enough to carry across the entire field, and from the rooftop, we had a full, clear view. but there was nothing. Not a single person. Then, as soon as the adhan started for Fajr, the crying stopped instantly, like someone had muted it every single time. We knew what it was. That was not a baby. That was a jinn. The second thing happened to me. One night, I was sleeping with the lights off. My room door was open because I get scared easily. Directly across from me was the bathroom, and beside me were the stairs. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked toward the door to see a shadow. It was short, and its eyes were glowing like a cat's, greenish, about the size of a big dog. It wasn't looking at me. It was staring at the window. I just lay there watching this strange thing. I immediately pulled the blanket over my head and started praying the verses I could remember from the Quran. I could feel the fear in my chest. I don't even know how I fell asleep, but eventually I did. The next morning, I woke up around 11 to my mom and sister talking. I ran to tell them what I had seen around 3 or 4 in the morning. They stared at me, and my mom said that was the exact same time she had sleep paralysis. She told me she had seen a tall shadow in the corner of her room, walking toward her, and she had tried to scream but couldn't. My sister said she woke up because my mom was mumbling in her sleep. So she shook her awake, and my mom told her about the shadow immediately. Then my mom told us we needed to play the Quran in the house every day. Since we had moved back, we had not played it at all, and she said that was the biggest mistake we had made. Thank God, after just one night of playing the Quran, everything disappeared. The footsteps, the banging on the closets, the baby crying, everything. And I swear to God, this is a real experience that happened to me and my family. By the way, even now, I sometimes see a shadow entering the bathroom. My mom has seen it too. I remember she was the first one who mentioned it. It was the last day of Ramadan in 2025. She was praying alone on the second floor and saw a shadow move so fast it was like a blink. She told us, but we didn't believe her until I saw it myself. I was sleeping in my sister's room since she had left the house, and the door was open. Around 7, I saw a shadow enter the bathroom. Immediately, I remembered what my mom had told us. I ran to my mom and dad. They were still sleeping, so I waited for them to wake up, and then I told them. My mom said, "You see? I told you all before that I saw something." My dad told me to play the Quran on the second floor and not to focus on these things or let them scare me. From time to time, we still hear footsteps or see shadows, but only occasionally. Story 12. So, my family's house used to be kind of haunted, and while there were many incidents, this is the one that freaks me out the most. My dad had gone hunting, so it was just me, my mom, and my twin brother. My twin and I were around 3 years old at the time. One night, my mom woke up at about 3 in the morning to the sound of a woman sobbing. At first, she thought it was a dog howling, or maybe me or my twin crying. When she checked on us, we were both sound asleep. About an hour passed, and the more she listened, the closer the crying seemed to get, and it sounded older and clearly feminine. Eventually, I walked in and asked, "Mommy, who's crying?" That terrified my mom, who had been hoping the sound was just her imagination. The crying continued for several more hours, and by the time it stopped, the woman sounded like she was screaming, crying, and begging for something none of us could understand. Then the sun came up, and the sound disappeared completely. Later, we did some digging and found out that our property had a history of a woman seen walking around the house at night in a long white dress. With even more digging, we found old seance invitations and other strange things. A lot more happened over the years, and it was all really creepy. Story 13. I don't usually get creeped out, as I mostly try to reconcile my experiences with my own consciousness and the infinite permutations of all other consciousnesses. However, there was one night when I was a kid that stood out. I heard a knock on my bedroom window in the middle of the night. My room was on the second story, with no balcony and no way to place a ladder. The single-pane windows were covered in thick plastic permanently to help insulate and trap heat, so it was strange that the knock sounded as if it were directly on the window. Separately, when my children were around 3 and 5 years old, I was upstairs in my room, which was across the hall from their rooms. I was making sure they had fallen asleep before I went downstairs, since I wouldn't be able to hear them from there, and we were no longer using baby monitors. My bedroom door was closed, and both of my children's doors were closed as well. Then I heard a knock on my bedroom door, and it wasn't a child's knock. I assumed it was either my ex-husband, though that would have been uncharacteristic since it was his room too, or my friend who was there at the time, which also wouldn't have made sense. My ex-husband was with him downstairs, and there was nothing my friend would have needed from me that my ex couldn't have gotten for him. I said, "Come in," but there was no reply. I said it again, still nothing. So I got up, opened the door, and no one was there. I didn't hear crying or anything coming from my children's rooms, so I knew for sure it wasn't them. This was a split-level house of nearly 2,000 square feet. Directly upstairs from the front door was the kitchen, and to the left was a hallway of about 25 feet, with doors to all the bedrooms at the end. Downstairs had a similar layout, and to reach the room down there, you had to turn left and walk about 20 to 25 feet. My point in explaining all of that is that after seeing no one when I opened the door, I went downstairs, and my ex and my friend were in the room down there, completely absorbed in whatever they were discussing. They were sitting at the computer, fully engaged, so there was no way that knock had come from either of them. That second knock, the one I heard as an adult, made me 100% certain that the first one I heard as a kid wasn't a dream. I already didn't think it was, but over the years I had dismissed it as one, until it happened again. Story 14. Yay, I'm a day late, but this is worth sharing, I swear. If anyone has an idea of what this was that visited me and my family for years, I'm all ears. My mom, my grandma, and I all lived in this house, built by my great-great-grandparents, for a few years without too much issue. It was just an old, spooky, creaky house. One morning, I got up and overheard my mom and grandma talking. I found out that my grandma was claiming there were footprints in front of her bedroom window. We live in a pretty rural area. You can only hear the neighbors if they're shooting guns or four-wheeling. My mom didn't believe her, but I was curious, so I went out to look. I see two bare, seemingly human footprints in front of her window, as if someone had been peeking in, and they are huge. I wish I'd had something to take a picture with, because it was unbelievable, still is. My mom wouldn't go look at them, which didn't concern me then, but certainly does now. She knew something was up. Soon after this incident, I began waking most nights to a series of 3 taps on my window, just as I was drifting off to sleep. They repeated until I was too tired to hear them anymore. And yes, one time I was brave enough to look out. I saw nothing, thankfully. That was unsettling, but eventually I got used to it. What still gives me goosebumps is the night my mom had an undeniable experience. She's a strict Christian who doesn't believe in the paranormal. At least she didn't then. One morning, as I was getting up to make coffee, my mom asked if I had knocked on her bedroom door during the night. I absolutely hadn't. She went on to tell me she had been awakened by 3 knocks on her door. She thought it was me, so she said, "Hello?" but got no answer. Then came 3 more knocks. My mom said she felt an overwhelming sense of dread and kept telling herself not to leave the room. I have never heard her speak like that since, and I have never seen her that scared. The same thing happened to me a few weeks later. I don't know why we were both so nonchalant about it then, because now I feel like I couldn't handle something that terrifying. Story 15. This is my account of the only truly scary occurrence in my life. It was mid-October, 1992. I was riding home on my motorcycle after visiting some friends. It was late in the evening, drifting into the early morning hours of a chilly fall weekend in Central California. I had just turned off the county freeway onto a poorly lit county road. I remember the road ahead being completely deserted, no headlights coming toward me, and no taillights in my mirrors. On both sides, large walnut groves lined the road, the massive trees and surrounding land swallowing the distance ahead in total darkness. I was clipping along at about 50 miles per hour when my eyes caught a jogger up ahead of me on the right side. My mind immediately thought, how odd, wondering why someone would be out here jogging at this time of year and at this hour of the night. As I approached, I eased toward the middle of the road to give the jogger space. I tapped my brights so he would see me coming. At first, nothing seemed unusual to me, aside from the timing of it all. A hooded runner in heather gray sweats, a figure about 6 feet tall, jogging along the shoulder of a deserted county road at midnight in October. As I approached him at a safe distance of maybe 100 feet, my headlight blazing, I saw him, or should I say it, stumble. I fully expected the figure to fall and sprawl face down into the plowed dirt. But it didn't. It did fall to the ground, onto all fours. But then, with startling speed and unnatural agility, it began running. Like an animal, on all fours. Like a wild creature. I was riding at a steady speed, maybe 55 miles per hour. But the hooded human shape I had just watched turn into something else was keeping pace with me for a moment. Then, as if it sensed it had been discovered, it veered sharply to the right and disappeared into the pitch-black walnut grove. My blood ran cold. I downshifted out of instinct and opened the throttle hard. I was gone. All I could think, in that split second, was that the thing, whatever it was, might suddenly appear in my rearview mirror with some horrific, maniacal, twisted face right before ending me. Before I knew it, I was 5 miles down the road, and my speedometer read 100 miles per hour. Just before making my final right turn toward home, I gathered the courage to glance into the mirror. Nothing. Only pitch-black darkness behind me. Whatever it was gone. Shaking, I made my last turn and didn't look back again until I pulled into my garage and closed the door. To this day, more than 30 years later, I can tell that true story, and people still react with disbelief. Some believe me, others don't. What was it? A person, an animal, a shapeshifter, a skinwalker, or something that was a combination of all of them? You decide. Story 16. I've had plenty of paranormal encounters, seeing wispy ghosts, shadow people, even being stalked by an unseen entity in the woods. But the creepiest, I think, is when you hear something that feels intelligent and malicious, or trickster-like. This happened to me 2 times. The first was when I was 17. I had left my phone at home while I was at school. When I got back, my dad asked about a strange voicemail I had left on his phone. He played it, and I swear to you, it sounded like a demon speaking in some evil, primordial language. It was gurgling and unnaturally low, but it had a clear grammatical structure and an unmistakably hateful tone. It sounded like it was making threats. It didn't resemble phone interference at all. I cried when I heard it. My dad didn't seem very shaken, but he immediately deleted it. I still don't know why, especially when we had literal proof of something so deeply paranormal. I went upstairs afterward, and my phone was just lying there on my dresser, perfectly still and innocent. The second time was just unsettling. I had moved into a very grungy garden apartment from the 1970s with my boyfriend. During our first week there, something woke me by repeatedly whispering in my ear, "Hey." I said my boyfriend's name, and the thing replied, "Yeah," in this creepy, grinning voice, like it was delighted by my confusion and fear. I couldn't fall back asleep, but that was the only haunted phenomenon I ever experienced in that apartment. Please know I'm speaking from my heart when I say this. I'm sharing the God's honest truth. Experiences like this genuinely creep me out, but I hope that by sharing them, we can feel a little less alone in how much of a mind bender these kinds of encounters can be. Story 17. I usually stay somewhere in the middle when it comes to things that happen on planes we can't see, but I do consider myself sensitive because I can feel and explain things happening to people, or to the place itself. I never thought of myself as a medium, just someone who could sense things that, later on, were explained to me as, "We're near a cemetery," or "Someone did macumba nearby." But I don't know if this came from some sort of connection. It's strange. Still, something scared me deeply. It's a long story, but to make it short, I saw figures, shadows walking in humanoid shapes, and I spoke to a spirit I considered my protector. He explained each of the entities and what they were doing there. I said I would remove them, but only one remained, and I kept in touch with that one. We talked, and at first I considered him an imaginary friend, something created by the difficult situation I was going through. But that changed when I visited the house of a medium on my mother's side. I didn't tell my mother anything about it, but as we entered the house, he looked behind me with wide, angry eyes, and protectively told me to quickly go inside, assuring me he would handle it. I know how to interpret situations like that, so I looked back thinking he must have been talking to a stranger. But the stranger wasn't alive. It was the friend I had always considered imaginary. The medium questioned him, asking who he was and what he was doing there, and he answered with the exact nickname I had given him. I mentally said that I wanted to see, opening myself to the spiritual world in the way people say you can, and I saw only a pair of penetrating eyes, human and startled, like he was shocked that the medium could see him. The medium told him he could not enter, because he had protectors who knew exactly how to deal with beings of his kind, and he replied, "I know." The friend I thought was imaginary. I could hear their conversation clearly, and it gave me a headache. So I stepped away. Strangely, I felt better the moment I moved farther from my supposed friend, who kept insisting he would not hurt me. The medium told me to be careful about who I speak to in the spiritual world, and not to talk to him anymore, because he was not who he claimed to be. Story 18. My childhood home was badly haunted. My father, my mother, and I all seemed to be possessed by whatever it was, one at a time. And the only reason I noticed was because, like dominoes, we suddenly had 0% energy. We couldn't clean, couldn't eat, could barely move. One by one, each of us was drained of what felt like 90% of our life force, or soul, or whatever you want to call it. After a while, one person would come back to life, and then it would start happening to someone else in the house. The only way I could even begin to understand it as a haunting was because my father and I, on multiple occasions, saw things flip back and forth on their own. The scariest moment involved the shower curtain. One day, my dad told me to go take a shower, and for some reason, I was too terrified to even look into the bathroom. He came to get me, and as we were walking down the hallway toward the bathroom, both of our necks snapped toward the shower at the exact same moment. On everything I could ever love, it looked like someone on the other side was trying to rip the damn curtain down, loudly, violently, like it wanted to be heard. He told me to go to bed. I backed silently into my room, absolutely terrified. Neither of us ever mentioned it again, but the moment I was finally forced to leave that house, the sleep paralysis stopped, the weird figures stopped, and the night terrors tied to whatever was going on. They're calmed down dramatically. Personally, though, I fully believe whatever was haunting our house followed them, because years later I visited my father for the holidays. Everything was sweet at first. The vibe was normal. We were just talking and catching up. But the first night I slept there, guess what happened? Immediate sleep paralysis, borderline hallucinations, extreme fatigue, and crushing anxiety. All at once. So yeah, something got to me as a kid, and it definitely latched onto my father. Story 19. I was house sitting for a young couple and taking care of their cats. I went into the basement to clean the litter boxes and saw shadows moving in the corner. I chalked it up to my imagination and started heading up the stairs. Suddenly, the back of my neck broke out in goosebumps. One of the cats, who had been waiting at the top of the stairs, looked past me and started growling and hissing like crazy. Then he bolted, and he wouldn't come near me for the rest of my stay. At night, I kept hearing footsteps going up and down the stairs, and a small rocking horse began rocking on its own. I know it sounds cliché, but later I found out the house had been built on an old Native American site. Story 20. Every summer, I would leave the States to visit my grandmother, who lived alone in our family's old wooden home on a rural mountain in the Dominican Republic. The property had 2 buildings, the main house where she stayed, and a smaller structure just a few steps away, essentially 2 bedrooms with wood plank walls, tin roofs, and bare concrete floors. The place always carried a strange energy. It wasn't just me. Almost every family member who stayed there had some kind of paranormal experience. But this one truly shook me. It was around 2005. I was about 15 or 16 at the time. That night, a friend and I had gone into town to watch a late-night volleyball game. Afterward, we hung out in the town square, listening to music and grabbing food from street vendors like everyone else. Around 1 a.m, we finally headed back. When we got to my grandmother's house, everyone was already asleep and the main house was locked, so we stayed in the smaller house. It was about 16 by 16 feet, with 1 bed in the front room and 2 more in the back. We took the back room. Each bed was pushed against opposite walls. My friend fell asleep instantly, but I couldn't shake this creeping sense of unease. Moonlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, casting thin streaks of silver across the room. In the distance, I started hearing dogs howling, faint at first, then closer. I counted at least 10, maybe 12 of them, and they kept getting louder and closer. Then, silence. I froze. From outside, I heard the slow crunch of boots on gravel approaching the wall right beside me. Through the wooden slats, I saw the shadow of a figure, a tall person wearing a cowboy or fedora-style hat, standing directly next to where I lay. There was maybe an inch of wood between us. The moonlight disappeared where the figure stood, its presence swallowing the light. The dogs surrounded it. I could hear their low growls, and then a sudden yelp, followed by the sound of the whole pack scattering into the night. Whatever this thing was, it frightened all of them off. I couldn't move. I tried praying under my breath, whispering to myself while watching its shadow through the cracks. Then it slammed the wall, a full-force smack, inches from my head. It began dragging its hand across the wood, slowly, deliberately, as if it wanted me to hear every inch of the scratch. Then again, another violent smack, another long, dragging scrape like claws raking across the wall. I shut my eyes tight, terrified, and forced myself to count to 10. When I opened them again, it was gone. No footsteps walking away. No more howls. No sound at all. Just silence. I didn't sleep a single second that night. My friend, he slept like a baby, said he didn't hear a thing. I never stayed in that little house again. I still don't know how my grandmother lived there alone all those years. After she passed, the activity seemed to stop, and the place became much calmer. Story 21. In our previous home, we had several spectral guests. 1. A figure that would come down the stairs and either peek around the corner into the living room or sit at the dining room table. This one actively looked for my youngest child. I watched it walk to the laundry room door, turn the knob, and open it. I mentioned that she wasn't home, and it closed the door and went back upstairs. 2. One we believed was a child. It would play with my hair, something several people witnessed, or gently rub my arm. 3. One that paced back and forth on the porch, passing in front of the windows like it was walking a routine path. However, the last two were not particularly pleasant. The first of the two would linger in the closet doorway, stand at the foot of the bed, or even stand in the bathroom while I showered. I believe this one was responsible for my night terrors. My husband told me I would scream in my sleep and mutter words he couldn't understand. It also gave him a nightmare in which it said to him, "She is mine." The dream scared him so badly that he got up to check on everyone, and he said all of us, including the dogs, were lying in the exact same positions we had been in during his dream. The second one, again, involved me. Early one morning, I felt something poking my shoulder and whispering, "Mommy, Mommy." I woke up thinking it was our youngest. I rolled toward what I thought was her, only to see a small, dark figure, perched, almost like a cat, on the edge of the bed. I just rolled back over and closed my eyes. Lol. Story 22. In the 80s, I was living in Parker, Colorado, in a new development surrounded by farms and a dry riverbed. My friend Joey and I used to walk along the riverbed and hike around, exploring. One day, we came across an old, dilapidated farmhouse that was clearly abandoned. But in the second-story window, we saw a kid staring down at us. We waved, and they waved back. We called out as we walked toward the house, but the kid didn't respond, just kept standing there, watching us. It felt strange, but curiosity won out, so we walked around the corner and went in through the side door, which was hanging off its hinges. When we stepped inside, we immediately froze. There was no ceiling on the ground floor, no second story, no roof, just sky, open and empty above us. The entire place was a hollow shell, and there was absolutely no way anyone could have been standing in that second-story window, because there was no second story. Joey and I just stared at each other, both realizing at the same time what that meant. To this day, it still unsettles me. I'm not even a believer in paranormal stuff, not really. So having something happen that I can't logically explain throws me for a loop even now. It's one of those memories I keep replaying, trying to find the trick or the illusion. But I can't. The kid we saw shouldn't have been there, yet we both saw them. Story 23. I had so many experiences when I was younger, some of which I've shared in other posts. Here's a quick recap. In my mid to late teens and into my early 20s, I had regular visits from the Hat Man. During those encounters, he would take me to these strange, otherworldly places where I'd have to complete different tasks, each one demanding a deep, unwavering faith in God to get through. His presence was absolutely horrifying, and just seeing him was enough to fill me with dread. I can't even describe the relief I felt when those visits finally stopped. While I was at university, I had a friend who claimed she could see and talk to dead people, many of whom would show up seeking her help. She was the roommate of one of my closest friends. During spring break of my first year, I could not stay in my dorm, so my friend, who was away, offered to let me stay in her room. The roommate who could see the dead picked me up. When I went into my friend's bedroom, the closet door was open, which always unsettled me. It was daytime, and I closed the door before walking out. A moment later, I heard it creak open. She laughed and told me to close it again. It happened the same way twice, even though I was certain I had shut it properly. She told me to turn on the closet light and then close the door. This time, it stayed shut. According to her, the ghost that lived in the closet was afraid of the dark. My friend confirmed it when she returned from her trip. Another time at their place, she was making us drinks in the kitchen while we were in the living room just in front of her. She stopped mid-sentence and looked toward her bedroom. Then she said, "A man with no skin just arrived," and went to speak with him. I slept on the floor that night since both of my friends were there. The couch was too soft for my back. It was summer, and although the air conditioning was on, I have asthma and did not want it running while I slept. In the middle of the night, I woke up absolutely freezing, with the sensation of wind spinning around me in one direction. It was fast and cold, and I was shivering. I asked them to stop, to let me sleep in peace, and to stop being annoyed that I was there, that these were my friends, and I was not there to replace them. The wind and cold stopped, and I was able to sleep. Also, during my first year, I had a 7:30 a.m. class in the art building. The hallway had 5 classrooms, all on one side, with stairwells at both ends and a water fountain near the front. We were the only class there at that hour, and all the other rooms were locked with heavy metal doors. There were rumors that the building was haunted by a girl who had died there in the 1970s. Just before class, I went to fill my water bottle, and a friend followed to do the same. 2 doors down, a classroom door opened by itself into a completely dark room. I looked back at my friend, and we both shrugged. When I walked to the next and last door before the fountain, the same thing happened. The door opened on its own into another dark room. It was 7:25 a.m. There was no one else in the building, no one in those rooms, and no way for the doors to open from a draft. The rooms were completely dark, blinds drawn, windows shut, and doors locked. My friend was unnerved and went back to the classroom. I simply said aloud, "Leave me alone, I'm thirsty," filled my bottle, and returned to class. After university, I moved to Philadelphia for a postgraduate program located in Center City, housed in a double Victorian row home known for frequent ghost sightings. I had trouble finding an apartment, so I lived on site for a week in a carriage house behind the main building. I still had access to the main house to use the computers and the internet. This was in the days before we had ubiquitous Wi-Fi. One night, while going up the stairs alone, I definitely felt a presence. A cold wind passed by me unexpectedly. Later, I would see lights turn on in the main building at night and could have sworn I saw a shadow in one of the windows. One day, during normal hours, I went to my locker on the lower level, where many items were stored. There were several racks of clothing, and I saw a sleeve move by itself. We knew that before the buildings were renovated, a man had hanged himself in his bathroom, which had since been converted into a library. A friend once claimed she had been in there alone when a book threw itself at her. She never went back inside, not even once. We also knew about the typical shrieking lady in white ghost. We would hear her from time to time. I was with several other people in one of the larger rooms when she shrieked, and we all froze like stone. The best moment, though, was when I was hanging out in one of the larger rooms with a big fireplace along with several classmates. I was telling a friend all my earlier ghost stories when the lights started to flicker. I kept talking, and the lights flickered more and more. Finally, another friend on the opposite side of the room shouted at me, "Just stop already. They don't like it." Ghosts. Story 24. I do not know if this is super creepy, but it definitely was for me. During my first year of university, I moved to a different town, and my parents gave me a credit card. Not even a month in, the card just vanished into thin air. I almost never took it with me, so I started by checking my room. We each had only a bed, a desk, and a small closet, and I searched every inch of that space multiple times. I felt really irresponsible and a bit ashamed, so I checked everywhere I possibly could. my university flat, my classrooms, my boyfriend's place, even back home at my parents' house. Nothing. After a few days, I decided to report it to the local police, block the account, and get another card. I assumed it had been stolen, even though I rarely carried it with me. My roommate was hardly ever there. She lived in a nearby town and went home every weekend. And she always seemed like a nice, honest person. A few months passed, and I forgot about the credit card entirely. Then one day, I was studying in my student bedroom alone. The door and windows were closed because it was cold. I suddenly felt a strange breeze, and I heard something small fall behind me. When I turned around, I saw my missing credit card lying in the middle of the room on the floor. I checked a million times. Yes, it was my card. To this day, I still cannot understand how it got there or where it had been all that time. To make things even stranger, the same thing seemed to happen to my roommate with a small notebook she used often to write down her class schedules. It disappeared out of the blue, only to reappear the same way my credit card had, right in the middle of the room on the floor. I learned about it when I told her and her boyfriend what had happened to me, and they looked at me in complete disbelief, saying, "That happened to her last week." Story 25. True story from approximately 2007. I was 24 years old at the time and married to my first wife, now ex. My family and I were on a trip to visit my uncle in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, before he sold the old farmhouse. My aunt, may she rest in peace, had passed tragically in a car accident 5 years earlier. So it was a big deal that he was finally moving on and selling their large old house. The house was built in the mid-1800s and was enormous, with many rooms, and incredibly spooky. I had always been hypersensitive to the atmosphere there from the moment I first stepped inside years earlier, and many others in our family felt the same. There were countless stories about it being haunted, doors opening and closing on their own, items being moved and placed in strange spots, and on the floor where I was staying, a family member once claimed that someone climbed into bed with her. My uncle enjoyed telling stories about how the house had been used during the American Civil War as a field medical station. So many horrific soldier deaths had occurred inside its walls. The first and only night we stayed on this trip, my ex and I were in the first room on the most haunted floor. In the middle of the night, we both woke up freezing. It was late November, and the nights there were extremely cold. We realized the blankets had been pulled off the bed. I climbed out and switched on the light, only to see that the big, heavy blankets were neatly folded in the corner, away from the bed. We were both terrified and completely unnerved at that point. Of course, being my ex, she immediately started questioning me, asking why I would do this and insisting it was not funny. An argument broke out, and we bickered back and forth, with me insisting I had done nothing, which I hadn't. I managed to get the blankets back on us and switched the light off. As we were trying to fall asleep again, my ex said, "So who did that then? A ghost?" At that exact moment, the radiator in the room started going off like crazy. So loud, it sounded as if someone were hitting it with a baseball bat. We were both completely shaken. Neither of us slept for the rest of the night, and we stayed in a hotel for the next few nights. The following morning, my uncle told us that the radiator heating had not even been turned on yet. Soon after, my uncle sold the house. Final note, and also creepy. My aunt's ashes were buried on the grounds of that house because she had loved it so much. Story 26. Being woken up by my doppelganger was one of the strangest experiences of my life. It was bizarre to feel myself being nudged awake, only to sit there staring at myself. We stayed like that for about 3 minutes. We did not speak. He just smirked the entire time before disappearing. I still think he might have been a demon. Story 27. I had two separate experiences, years apart and in different houses, though they were on the same street, maybe 200 yards from each other. I never really thought about that until now. My mom was like a gypsy and loved to move, so we changed homes often. The first house was next door to a church. I was around 13 to 16 years old then. The house was too small for our family, so we put up walls in the basement to create a bedroom for me and a playroom for my little brother, who was about 3 to 5 at the time. I had things go missing down there, specifically my snake. He would always turn up eventually, but nothing I did stopped it from happening. I even had the local snake guy help me secure the setup. There was supposedly no way for him to escape, and yet he still got out. I had weird things happen down there, strange sounds, things shifting. Until one day I was on my computer and suddenly felt like someone was watching me. I turned, and at the end of my bed, there was a black figure sitting there, slightly leaned back. I cannot be sure, but it looked like he was tossing my socks in his hand. I could not make out many features, but it seemed like he was wearing an old-style hat, something vaguely like a pirate hat, but not quite that. I whipped my head back toward my computer, trying to process what I had just seen. My plan was simple. In one motion, get up and bolt out the door. Whether he was still there or not, I knew I would have to run right past him. Sure enough, when I turned again, I saw him out of the corner of my eye, still there. I never slept in that room again, and I never told a soul. A few months later, when we moved, my great aunt, who lived with us, was talking about my little brother and said, "At least he'll play with his toys now. He said he would not go in the basement because of the black man." I nearly had a heart attack. To this day, my little brother will not tell me what he saw. He just gets weird when I bring it up. He might not really remember it anymore, but I still think about it. The second house was about 3 to 4 years later. My room was in the attic, and the other attic room was used for storage. One night, my girlfriend and I were sleeping when I woke up to the bed shaking. She woke up from it too. I told her it must have been the house settling or something, and we went back to sleep. It felt like the moment we both drifted off, the bed started shaking violently, yet nothing else in the room was moving. I looked over at her to see if she was awake, and she was pale, staring straight at the door. I followed her gaze, and the doorknob was moving back and forth. Not fast, just a slow, steady turning. I assumed it was my sisters or their friends messing around. I said something, I cannot remember what, but the doorknob stopped. Then it started going like crazy. I forgot to mention that the bed stopped shaking the moment the doorknob started moving. We sat there stunned, and just as we both started drifting off again, it all started over. This time, I got up and crept toward the door, ready to catch whoever was doing it. I held my hand just above the doorknob, close enough to feel it moving wildly, but without touching it. I whipped the door open. Nobody. I searched the storage room. There was nowhere to hide anyway. There was no chance anyone could have run down the steps to the landing and then down the second set of steps to the door. They would not have reached the landing in that amount of time. My girlfriend was terrified. I took her home and then came back. I remember saying into the room, "I'm not afraid. Stop hiding from me." For some reason, I wasn't scared this time, not the way I had been in the first house. I've kept this in the back of my mind my entire life. If spirits or any kind of intelligent energy from the deceased are real, I've wondered if it could have been my grandfather who had passed the year before. At the time, I was a bad kid selling drugs, not weed. My grandfather had been a cop. I've always wondered if he was trying to parent me one last time. Story 28. My house used to be a small school back in the 1950s, or at least that is what I was told. In the backyard, you could always find marbles buried in the dirt, and even an old pole from where the playground used to be. For a long time, nothing creepy ever happened. Everything felt completely normal. When I was around 6 to 8 years old, I do not remember the exact year, but this went on for months. I would sleep with my brother, with the bedroom door open and the hallway light on. For some reason, I was terrified of sleeping, and honestly, I still am. I swear that when I opened my eyes at night, I would see a black figure staring at me. It was not like a shadow person, but more like a strange, featureless shape. Its arms and legs looked pointed, and the entire thing reminded me of a moving scribble on paper. I would also hear whispering in my ears while I was trying to fall asleep. I still do not know if it was my imagination or something else, but as I grew older, I tried not to think too much about it. For many years, nothing happened. Then one night when I was 15, I was playing Minecraft at around 3:20 in the morning. I had my headset on with the volume low, and I was in a Discord call with someone whose microphone was muted. Out of nowhere, I heard a little girl giggle behind me. I spun around and looked everywhere, but nothing was there. I ran to my brother's room to ask if he had heard it, but he said he hadn't. What's strange is that the person on Discord heard it too. My parents don't believe me when I tell them about it. They say it might have been a noise playing through my headset, but I clearly heard it coming from outside of it. After that, I was scared to sleep in that room. A few months later, I was lying in bed very late at night. My door was closed, not latched, but almost, and I was facing it. I watched it slowly open on its own. Nothing came through, but I thought it was strange. That was the last thing that ever happened to me in that house. But recently, something did happen to my dad. My dad works remotely, and his office is downstairs beneath my room. One day, while he was working, he heard me having a conversation with someone. He stepped out of his office and called for me, but got no reply. He came upstairs, and as soon as he did, the talking stopped. He went into my room and found that I wasn't there. When I eventually got home, he was shaken and kept asking if I had been messing with him. It was pretty freaky. I still live in the house, but ever since hearing the little girl, I can only sleep if someone is in my bed, or if I play a loud YouTube video and pass out. I even put blankets over my ears because I'm scared of hearing whispering. I'm definitely looking forward to moving out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.